All right, welcome everyone to my first recap from the Biel Chess Festival. I finished about an hour ago. And before I get into the game, I want to give a huge thank you to Alex, who came all the way from Geneva and gave me this amazing Swiss chocolate. He said he lives next to a chocolate factory, and these look delicious. So big thanks to Alex. Coming into this game, I had almost no time to prepare because pairings went up about 15 minutes before the round. But I think this played into my favor, and we'll see why. So I was playing against Steve Papaux from Switzerland. I was told after the game that he's one of the young and up and coming players from this country, so perhaps a little bit underrated. And the little preparation that I did before the game, I saw that he plays the Catalan as white. So I was just reviewing some more general lines, and we did go into the Catalan after what starts as a Queen's Gambit, Knight f3, Knight f6, and g3. And I decided to play one of my main weapons that I've used over the years against the Catalan, and it starts with dc4, bishop g2, and bishop to b4 check. This is still pretty well-known theory, and after bishop to d2, I play a lesser common line, which is pawn to c5. And this line maybe doesn't have an official name, but when I play it on stream, I like to call it the Ray Robson variation. A good friend of mine, Grandmaster Ray Robson, played this years ago before it was even like at all well known, and he won a lot of like really nice games in this line. And I like this line because it's a very confrontational approach to the Catalan, and it's very offbeat. A lot of players are not prepared for it, and I was happy to see that my opponent just started thinking in this position, took a few minutes before making his next move. And there's a lot to consider here for white, just because there's pressure between the bishops and the pawns, and there's a lot of different moves white can play between taking on b4, taking on c5, castling and leaving the tension. a3 is a move. So my opponent ultimately decided to take on b4, and after c takes b4, he played queen a4 check. And this is one of the more natural approaches for white. Queen a4 is very common to win back the pawn. And the other idea is after I play knight c6, defending the pawn, he has a move knight e5. And at first this looks very scary for black, given that my knight is pinned and attacked 3 times by the knight, bishop, and queen, only defended once by my pawn. But this was actually still opening preparation on my part. And this is actually one of the lines that inspired me to play this opening, because there's a really cool trap that white can easily fall into, especially if white's not careful. So I pretty quickly played the move bishop to d7, essentially breaking the pin, trying to defend the knight. And after my opponent takes on c6, I take, he takes, I take. And from this position, it looks like white is going to win a pawn, because we see queen takes c6 is check, and then c4 will hang. And my opponent pretty quickly took on c6, but I'm pretty sure that he didn't see one of the main points for black is after I play knight d7, the c4 pawn is poisonous. And he took some time here realizing that the pawn is not capturable. And I've had this position many, many times in online blitz and bullet. Maybe I can just check my my Lichess stats real quick. Let's see. As black, I've had this 5 times on Lichess, probably a few times on chess.com as well. And every time I've reached this position online, my opponents have taken the poisoned pawn. And the reason why this is a blunder for white, hopefully most of you watching will see the move for black. If you don't see it, feel free to pause the video, black to move, and punish white. The move is rook to c8, essentially skewering the queen and the c1 square. And there's no way for white to move the queen and cover c1, and here black is winning a decisive amount of material. So I was not expecting my opponent to actually allow rook c8, and he made the right decision to castle instead and hold off on taking the pawn. And now we have a kind of interesting situation where my pawns are a little bit overextended, but they do control space. And now white is threatening to take on c4, so I play the move rook c8, hitting the queen and defending the pawn. He plays queen to a4, hitting b4 and a7, so I played one of the only moves to defend both pawns, which is a5. And then he plays a3. And at this point, this is basically out of my opening preparation from whatever I looked at like years ago, just because not too many players will enter this line without falling for the trap. But I knew black should at least be close to equal. I was trying to figure out a way to avoid too much liquidation and a way to just keep things on the board and try and play for a win. But it wasn't super simple here because white is ready to just take on b4, and I ended up playing queen to b6, reinforcing the b pawn. But then after takes, my opponent played I think what is a nice move, knight d2, and it's not so easy to actually keep everything reinforced and also to castle my king because my king is tied down to defending the knight, which is pinned by the queen on a4. So by the time we reached this position, I realized it's really not so simple for black, and it's probably white who has just a preferable position, given that there's a lot of pressure, and these pawns are more of a liability than a strength for black. So I took a lot of time here. We can see by the timestamps, I was already a little bit behind on time, and I forget how long I took to make my next move. Almost half hour to play queen takes d4. And the reason why it took so long was there's a few options for white in this position. Now my opponent played queen takes b4, which is probably the safest approach. But there's another interesting option to play rook to d1. And the idea with this move is white is exerting a lot of pressure along the d-file, and my plan here was actually to sacrifice my knight. I was going to castle, allow a move like knight f3, and then take on b2. And I thought this would be a really cool position. After rook takes d7, I am down a knight, but I have two very dangerous connected passed pawns. And yeah, they're either bc3 or b3, or even queen takes e2 to start with. And I thought there would be good chances for black to play for a win from here. But we didn't go into that because he played the move queen takes b4. And this leads to a bit of simplification. I play rook b8, he plays queen c3, and we trade. And then we get to this endgame, which I thought was going to be kind of boring and very dry, but it turned out to be like really complicated and intense. And my opponent actually found some really strong moves. After I play king e7, what I was basically expecting was knight takes c4, I'd play rook c8, I eventually win back the c-pawn, like if knight moves I take the c-pawn, and we would get some kind of drawish position, which I wasn't thrilled with, but I think it's really the best way for black to play. Should also mention here, rook a4, my plan was to play rook c7, and yeah, eventually I'll form the battery and win the pawn on c3. But instead of taking on c4 immediately, my opponent played a kind of nice, subtle preparatory move, rook d1. And this move came as a small surprise because it looks a bit innocuous at first. But the idea is white is delaying taking on c4 because there's also ideas of rook a7 and just pressuring my knight and my king on the 7th rank. And it was a little bit awkward to figure out what to do here, because if I defend the pawn, rook a7 comes, and I'm not sure if there's like a great move for black. Like if I unpin, then white gets all this initiative. White's probably already winning here because knight's hit and knight d6 is coming. So I had to be very careful, and I decided to play knight b6, defending the pawn, but still allowing rook a7, which my opponent played. I play king f6, And then white gets some annoying initiative. He plays knight to e4. My king is almost in some sort of mating net, but I do find safety on g6, holding together the kingside pawns. But it does look a bit awkward, and my opponent keeps applying pressure with the next move pawn to h4. And at this point, I realize that I'm probably in a bit of trouble just because white has so much better pieces than myself. Like my pieces are not that well coordinated. My king is way more of a target than any sort of useful piece. Even though it's an endgame and usually you want to prioritize king activity, the king is very awkward on g6. And white's already threatening to play h5 to chase my king away from defending f7. And I did not want the f pawn to fall. So I took some time here trying to figure out what to do. I had a lot of candidate moves. I was considering h5, which I rejected because of knight g5. I was also looking at rook f8, but that felt a little bit too passive. So I eventually decided to play the move f6, which looks a bit weakening at first, but the point is after h5, I can safely play king h6 and keep the g7 pawn defended, and I'm not losing the pawn on f7 because it's on f6. I thought at least black is holding on here. And I was expecting to go into this line where maybe, okay, white can still apply pressure and try and set up some forking ideas. But to my surprise, my opponent made a very bad blunder in this position, which I was very much aware of when I played f6. It looks quite attractive for white to play the move rook d6 and just apply pressure on the 6th rank, given that e6 is no longer defended. So my opponent played this move, having spent, 7 minutes? And this move is a blunder because it allows a pretty simple tactic, but the tactic is a very commonly overlooked type of move. So if you don't see the move for black, feel free to pause the video, but it's black to move and win material. And the move is knight to c8. And sometimes these backward knight moves, in this case a backward knight fork, can be a very easy thing to miss. And when I played this move, I thought I'm going to be easily winning because, okay, I'm winning the exchange, we're in the endgame, we're going to simplify a little bit. But it wasn't so simple. Because after I played knight c8, he played h5, hitting my king. And now the idea is if I take on h5, he can get out of the fork with rook a5 check and then save this rook. And yeah, this position would not be so simple for me. So I played king h6, keeping the king safe, keeping g7 defended, and now white has to lose one of the rooks. He played rook to c7, which I think is the best fighting chance, pressuring the c-pawn, and after I take, he takes with the knight. And yeah, white has some annoying compensation here because my c-pawn is undefendable, and there's also ideas of knight f7 exploiting my king very awkwardly placed on h6 and my undeveloped rook from h8. And when I played my next move, I actually instantly regretted it. The move I played was rook f8, which had the idea of just not getting forked, and now with knight f7, I can safely take. What I should have probably done was play rook g8, and we'll see the subtle difference between these moves. But after I played rook f8, my opponent played a very strong move pawn to g4. And not only does this defend h5, but it's setting up the very nasty knight f7, which is almost checkmate. Like if I move my rook away, it's checkmate. Now the reason why I would have really liked my rook on g8 in this position with black to move, just for example, if I play rook g8 and he still plays g4, the move I can play here is king g5. And this move is playable because g7 is defended. And I'm not getting mated. Like knight f7, I start just scooping up pawns with my king. But when I played rook f8 and he plays g4, now if I play king g5, he can just take on g7 with check. And I did not like the looks of this, even though I was tempted to go into this line. It just looked a little bit too risky, like king h4. And of course, I'm dreaming of king h3 and rook b1 checkmates. But after something like f3, white's pawns are defended. And if I play king g3, I'm not quite forcing mate because he has knight e4. And maybe it's my king who's about to get mated somehow, like e3, rook d7, f4. Maybe in some lines can create some mating net. So going back, once he played g4, I realized it's not so simple. And I was trying to figure out the best way to still try and create winning chances. And I took a long time here before playing the move rook b2. Took about 10 minutes on this move. And I played this move completely overlooking my opponent's response. And I think rook b2 is a very bad blunder. With that said, I'm not sure what I should have played. Like maybe f5. My opponent told me after the game that f5 is a better chance for black to play for win. Although I wasn't sure about the line knight f7, takes, and then rook f4. I think white is very close to drawing this. Like even though black is up a pawn in this ending, it's 4-on-3 with my double g pawns. I think it's hard to actually convert this. So one of the reasons why I played rook b2 was I thought it gave me better winning chances compared to that line, but my opponent now has a really nice tactical idea. And it's a bit ironic because a few moves ago, my opponent overlooked this move knight c8, which forked the rooks. In this position, I'm overlooking the same square, but this time there's rook c8. And for some reason, this move didn't cross my mind because in most lines, I assumed it's just bad for white to trade off the rook. But to my horror, if I take the rook, white doesn't take back. White just delivers mate. And my stomach just sank when I saw this move on the board. And for a moment, I thought I might just be losing, given that my rook is tied down to this mating idea. I really should have seen this concept because I was aware of checkmate in other lines. It's just not a move that crossed my mind. So thankfully, black is not completely losing here because I have a way to try and do some damage control. Now I do lose back a bit of material after the move rook to d2. It's very sad to have won the exchange a few moves ago. After takes, I had to give it right back. And not only that, but after rook c8, this played out in the game, I'm losing my c-pawn. There's no way to actually defend. And if I try and get counterplay with rook d1 or rook d2, it's not enough to win back a pawn. Rook d1, there's this, and if this, white takes and defends. So at this point, I realize it's going to be a bit of torture for me to try and hold on a rook ending, which I'm about to be down a pawn. So I tried to get as much activity as possible, starting with pawn to f5, attempting to undermine this mini pawn chain. My opponent plays f3, winning connect 4. And after takes, I was happy to find a nice square for the king, which now constantly pressures the g-pawn. Now he is able to take and defend c4 and cover c3, but the good thing for me is I have a good amount of activity, and white's a bit stuck now with the rook because it is tied down to defending the g-pawn. So I decide to make a small improvement with e5. He plays king g2. I play rook d1. I figured the first rank is one of the most active places for the rook, and now if the king ever moves up, there'd be ideas of rook to g1 to try and pressure the g-pawn. My opponent plays rook to e4 here, and then I play rook to c1. So just counterattacking the c-pawn, and yeah, I'm trying to draw at this point, so I would not have minded the trade. If takes, I would take. And even if rook c5, it does keep both pawns defended, but I think this is very, very close to a draw. So instead, my opponent played the move pawn c4, which again keeps the pawns defended, But the drawback of this move is the rook ends up getting stuck on the e4 square. And after I play the move rook c3, it's actually very difficult for white to make any progress. So again, if takes, I'm happy to liquidate a bit. So my opponent played king f2, and now I defend the pawn with king f6. And he plays king e1, trying to transfer the king to attack the rook. I play king e6, he plays king d2, and then I play rook to g3, and I offer to draw here because there's really no clear way for white to make progress. The king is cut off on the third rank. If he ever plays c5, that will allow king d5, and I'll eventually win the c-pawn. And if he plays the move e3 to potentially allow the king to come in, then the rook is completely trapped. Like, there's no more rook e3 ideas, and I think I'd be happy here just to play rook g2, king c3, and king d6. And white's just not making any progress. Like king b4, I check, and we can repeat. So basically what happened is after I played rook g3, I offered a draw. My opponent thought for a few minutes and accepted the draw. And I'm still trying to process what happened in this game. Like, I think I had winning chances after getting the fork earlier, but then I was very close to losing, like especially around this position. At least white is much for choice. And then even in endgame too, I thought white maybe has some winning chances with extra pawn. But yeah, overall, I'm not too disappointed, and I haven't had a chance yet to analyze with the engine, so I'm very curious what the engine will say. But for those that want to analyze further, I will leave a link to the game in the video description. I will also leave a link to the full standings and pairings and tournament website. Feel free to explore the video description. And also shout out to Jonathan Trantz, who did take over my Twitch channel for the first round. He did some commentary. I haven't had a chance to watch it, but I hope those that did, I hope you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, I don't think there's much more to say. I think it's time to find some food. The next round will be tomorrow at 2 p.m. Biel time. That's 7 a.m. U.S. Central Time. I'm usually in St. Louis, so I'm actually still overcoming some jet lag. But be sure to tune in for the next round, and I'll see you guys soon.